Good morning. I want you guys to know that I'm excited to be here this morning for the simple fact that we are starting a brand new series today called Crazy Love by Francis Chan. And I just wanted to let you know how this is going to work, because I feel like I've tried to announce this on a weekly basis, but even then my wife tells me that there's a bunch of things that people are confused about. And so I want to be clear on how this is going to happen over the next 5 weeks. It's a 10-week series, but what we're going to do is we're going to do the next 5 weeks, and then we're going to take a break for Easter, and then do the 5 weeks after to finish that off. And so just to let you know about how that's going to work. And Sunday mornings, what I'm going to be doing is jumping off whatever he's been talking about in the videos and the books, and preach on that, kind of my own thing on Sunday mornings. And then Sunday evenings at Thrive at 6 o'clock, in case you haven't been there before, we set up in groups around tables, and we're going to be watching the short video that goes with the series. And there's questions that it's your chance to ask questions and to discuss those things out. It's an incredible series, and I want to be clear on this. Some of you guys got the book. Some of you are still waiting for the book because it hasn't come yet. It should be here in the next little while. But you don't need the book to participate in any of this. The book is kind of for those of you who are keeners that want to read beyond what we're going to be doing. This will kind of give you some insight and some background on the stuff that we're going to be talking about. So just I wanted to be clear on that. That's the pastor hat. I'm going to take that off though for a moment because I want to tell you why I'm actually excited about this series. This series is about getting to know God. It's about getting real with Him, about getting real in our relationship with Him. And in so many different ways, I think we talk a lot in Christian circles about a relationship with God. We talk about this idea a lot of knowing God, but the thing is, you need to do more than know about God, right? We've been talking about that over the last few weeks. We need to learn to interact with Him, right? And so the problem with that, and I just find myself assessing these things once in a while, and the problem with that is that I think sometimes in our Christian faith we get stuck along that journey somewhere along the way. Do you know what the very first thing I did was as I started preparing for this morning? I sat down and I opened up my Bible program because I knew that Francis Chan was talking about prayer this week. And so I sat down and opened up my Bible program, and I compiled all kinds of verses about prayer and looked at all kinds of different ways in which prayer is talked about within the Bible, and I started compiling all that stuff. I started kind of considering and praying about how I could challenge some of you old saints about prayer and make it fresh and new for you. While at the same time, I know that there's some people that maybe prayer is a new kind of concept for you here, and so I needed to figure out how to talk about what prayer is for you to kind of give you some of those basic information. And so I started compiling information, and I started compiling teaching and illustration and that kind of thing. And all along the way, I realized, in fact, God caught me up in the middle of it to realize that I didn't stop and pray about what we're going to talk about here this morning once. Isn't that strange how that happens? You see, God, I know this is going to sound strange for anybody who doesn't understand the background of this, but God told me in that moment I need to stop being the teacher, stop presenting information, and start being the guy who spends time with Him. And that's an important lesson. I feel like we could almost stop there, and that would be enough for us this morning in some ways. I'm not going to do that. Information's good. We need teaching. We need good instruction. But at the same time, teaching without practicing it or living it out, that's dead. Right? In fact, if I could take a step beyond that, it's dangerous in all truth. Knowing the law, the ways that there is to pray, its definition, its methodology, that stuff is useful, but there's no salvation in that. Prayer becomes real in our lives. It becomes something of value to us when we pray. Right? And so this morning, I want to try something a little bit different. Tonight at Thrive, at 6 p.m., we're going to talk about all the hows and the whys and whens search out scriptures on prayer and all that kind of thing. This morning what I want to do is I want to talk about when we pray. In fact, in Scripture, that was the phrase that kind of caught my eye as I was looking at it. When we pray. And here's the reason why. It's because prayer is more than a church word. It's more than a tradition or a thing that you're supposed to do. Prayer is you getting to know God. It might just be the most important thing you will ever do in this lifetime. And so for that reason, I hope that the things that I'm about to share with you are things that will challenge you. They are things that I have found incredibly valuable for me when it comes to searching out this whole issue of prayer in my life. And I have 3 of them for you this morning, not because it's a pastor thing, but just because I find that we can't remember more than 3. So I'm going to give you kind of my 3 top things. And the first one is this. When you're getting to know God and talking to Him, number 1 I would throw at you this morning would be this. Stop before you start. Very simple kind of message. Stop before you start. Marriage is one of the closest relationships that we have in this life on purpose. Right? It's somebody that we grow close to. And I've discovered that I can listen and I can take things in without really paying attention. You ever notice that? I found that I can do it. In fact, I find that personally, I have this issue in my own life. I can't speak for any of the rest of you, but I personally have this issue in my own life that I have a tendency to have kind of a one-lane kind of mind. And so if I'm stuck on thinking about a situation or a circumstance, or if I'm in the mode of thinking about something that I'm doing at the time, it's really difficult for me to pay attention to anything that Laura says and take it in and really understand it. I'll hear her, I will listen to her, but in fact, I found that I have to do little things in my life. Like, for example, I have to look directly at her. Or I have to take the thing that's in my mind and I have to kind of put it into a box and kind of set it aside so that I can pay attention to her if I'm really actually going to take in what she's going to say to me. And in the same way, I don't think this is just a man thing. I think we are easily distracted as human beings, aren't we? I mean, stop and consider the million of different things that we have to deal with on a daily basis. The balance of friendships that we have to look after daily. The grind of daily pressures of work and play that we all have to kind of weave in and out of. We have goals and dreams that we all have. We have disappointments and heartbreaks. Parents have their kids to consider, right? Because just when you think you get things under control, they'll step in and make chaos for you, right? We all have responsibilities that weigh on top of us. We have 1,000 voices every day that scream in our ear for our attention. And it's just as important for my marriage and for my friendships that I control that chaos, isn't it? Stop before you start. I found that getting to know God is extremely difficult if He has to compete for my attention. Imagine, in fact, I was thinking about this. This isn't in my notes, but I was thinking about this week. My very first date with Laura was to go see a movie with a bunch of other people. And in the process of this, I got to see her a little bit going and a little bit going from. But I didn't get much to know Laura that night. Because that night there was a movie on, and when a movie's on, your attention is taken, right? Did we go on a date? Yep. Did we spend time together? Yep. Did I get to know much about her? Not really. And it's difficult to get to know God if we don't give Him space or time or our attention. In fact, if I could just kind of tell you in my own life some things that might help you out with this. Stop before you start. Every day I try to do this more than once, not just to pay attention to God better, but to pay attention to my life better. Stop, clear my head. If you think about it this way, wipe off my whiteboard. Right? And sometimes that takes longer than others, doesn't it? Sometimes, in fact, the only way that I can wipe off my whiteboard is to take something that's on that and give it over to God, because it's just so weighty and it's so large and it's in such black ink that I have trouble getting rid of it. unless I give it over to him. And yet every time this has become an invaluable practice in my life when it comes to talking to God. Psalm chapter 37 verse 7 says this, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently on him." That's good advice, don't you think? We need to stop before we start sometimes. That can be helpful. Number 2, when you're getting to know God, talking to him, don't babble. You can talk and at the same time not really say anything. Mm-hmm. Some people are in this place are better at that than doing others. Don't look at your neighbor. But it's true. Did you know that you can pray over your meal? You can pray out loud at church. You can do your morning prayer, and some of this is going to blow some of your minds, but and you can do it all without actually talking to God. Mm-hmm. That's true. There's a difference between talking to God and talking at God. That's a big statement. There's a difference between talking to God and talking at God. I've got this green shirt at home that I got from Value Village, just because I buy most of my clothes there. How can you beat $1.99 for a t-shirt, right? And pretty much every time that I'm in Halifax, we stop at Value Village and sift through it and find the good deals. But the honest truth is I bought this green shirt because I liked the logo on it. Didn't know anything about it. Tried to search it up, couldn't find anything online about it, so I bought it. And shortly after that, I was approached by somebody in another store who came up and told me how much they liked the band. It was their logo for this band that they had. Now, I didn't know that. I'm not a fan of the band. Never even heard of the band. I just liked the way the t-shirt looked. But I want you to consider this with me for a moment. What do you think would be more meaningful to the band itself? A guy that would talk about his love for them in public with a stranger, or a guy who wears their t-shirt and doesn't even know who they are? Right? I was thinking about another example. Every morning when I take Elijah up to the bus, he's old enough to go, so I take it up because I want to. Take him up. Not it. Anyway, take him up, and out of tradition, he's gotten in the habit over the last little while of before he gets on the bus, he says, "I love you, Dad," and I appreciate that. That means something to me, but I'll tell you, it doesn't mean as much as when we're walking down the road somewhere and doing something together, and out of nowhere he says, "Dad, I just want you to know I love you." There's a difference between those two things, right? You can say something without actually meaning it. And isn't it interesting that sometimes, especially when it comes to God, that sometimes we can get so professional at this prayer thing, especially people who have been in the church for a long time, right? We can get so caught up in the words that we forget what it's all about. You can dress up your words all you want, fill your time with Him with words and things that you're supposed to say. Pray over every meal and show the world that you're a Christian. And meanwhile, a single word from your heart is more meaningful than all of those things. Stopping and recognizing what He's done for me, speaking specifically to Him from the depths of my heart, and only saying the word thank you is more meaningful than 1,000 times that I've prayed over my food out of tradition. Babbling, speaking without thinking. There are times, I think, when God hears us rattle off some words. And I think He thinks we're as strange as the people around us look at us and think we are, because God knows the reality of it is we're praying, but we're not talking to Him. Do you know what the title of today's sermon is, or the section in the book is? It's called Stop Praying. Good advice. If you want to get to know God, you ought to stop praying and start talking to Him. I know that I'm playing with words a little bit, but I as a visual person, I want to tell you something that helps with me. I try to include with every one of these some things in my own personal life, but as a visual person, I try to fix it in my head that I actually am hanging out with God. I know that sounds like kind of a strange thing, and yet at the very same time, it makes a major difference to me. We have 4 seats at our table normally, I just pretend God's sitting in that empty seat. Or when I'm driving down the road, that He's sitting in the passenger seat looking out the window at His own creation. And you know why I do that? It's because when I do that, it changes the things that I say to Him. It changes the way that I approach Him. It changes and causes me to listen for Him in the midst of that. Psalm 95 says this, "Come, let us bow down. Worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for He is our God. We are the people who He watches over, His flock under His care." You see, that God is interested in me. Not well-rehearsed words or speeches or any of that stuff. I think He adores that from me because I give it to Him sometimes, if I'm honest. But what He wants is my words. He wants me. Which brings me to the third thing that I want you to consider this morning, and that is this. Stop before you start. That's good advice. Speak to Him, not at Him, right? Don't babble. Yet I would also say this, and if I could sum up the three of them and say this is hands down the most important thing, I would say it would be this. And I got to be honest, I struggled with the language on this. I didn't know how to really kind of define this for you. But I settled on these words for you this morning. Be undone. Surrender yourself when you come to Him. I'm aware that the story that I'm about to tell is a bit weird and creepy. But it was how I grew up, so it is a real story. There was a guy in the area where I grew up who liked to come up behind people and pinch them. I don't know why. I don't know what was wrong with him. I just know that as a child, I would watch for this guy and make sure that if he was anywhere in the building, kind of idea, that I knew where he was and I wouldn't turn my back on him. Because he would. He would come right up behind you and he would pinch you, and not a light little pinch. It was a hurtful pinch. And so I would, always be guarded whenever he was even in the room, so to speak. I know that's kind of an odd example this morning, but we do that with each other a lot, don't we? And we do it for good reason, if we're honest. You can't trust everyone that you meet. Let's just call that for what it is. In fact, there are some people that you cannot trust at all. That's just the reality of that. There are many that you can trust with most things. There are literally, in my own life, I sat down and counted them this week, there are less than a handful that I could tell, I believe, anything to. Because we've all placed our trust in somebody only to have it burned before, right? We've all found ourselves in a place where we leaned on somebody who has let us down. And I need to tell you this morning, I don't apologize for the next statement, because as long as you put your hope and trust in mankind, you will be disappointed. I mean, I'm not being pessimistic when I say that this morning. You were never meant to put all your hopes and dreams and everything else into each other. We're supposed to be here for each other. I agree with you, Esther, in what you said this morning. And yet at the same time, listen, I love you guys. I would never do this intentionally today. I would do everything I can to avoid it. And yet the truth is, if you were to put all your hope in me this morning, you would be disappointed, just like anybody else around you. Because where you're supposed to put your hope is in Him. Right? And I need to say this. God is not people. See, that's the thing that's different about Him in some of the circumstances that we do with other people. God is not my mom or my dad. He's not my pastor. He's not my boss. He's not even my friend. We use some words like that sometimes to describe kind of how He interacts with us. But the truth is, He is not people. God knows every thought that I have ever had in my life. He sees right into the depths of who I am. He comprehends the dynamics of my psyche, and He knows, beyond a shadow of a doubt, all the things that I know, and the things that I don't know, and the things that I think I know that are wrong. Right? And we could go on with that. Why? Because He designed me, He created me, He has walked beside me since the moment I was conceived, and I can't fool Him, I can't control Him, I can't surprise Him. And I tell you that because I want you to follow my thinking on this. Because He is not people, I can build walls between us. I can play games between us. I can guard my words with him or my emotions or my thoughts when I talk to him. But really all I do when I do that is I hurt me. Because any wall that I build blocks my sight from him, but he sees right through that wall. You see, wisdom makes us careful, right? Past hurt causes us to be cautious. Good sense tells us that we need to guard some things. But all these things do, when we use them in between us and God, is they put chains on our wrists in getting to know him. Why? Because you see, when I'm mad, he knows it. I can pretend that there's a wall and I'm all happy and everything in between it, but he knows it, and all that is me faking it before him. It does nothing for our relationship whatsoever. You see, when I'm broken with shame, he was there when he saw exactly why I'm broken with shame and what the reason behind it was. When I'm burdened, he was there and watched it be put on my shoulders, or me pick something up and put it on my shoulders depending on the situation. He sees my thoughts before I ever say a word. He knows my motivations before I ever ask him a question. He sees all, knows all, understands me, and this is the crazy part in the middle of it. He loves me anyway. Engages in our conversation and wants me to bring these things to him. But when I'm guarded, when I put my walls up, I am the one who is held back, not him. Do you see it? You know, our family devotions, we do them every morning before Elijah goes to school, and we just started this new book, and it's starting in Genesis and working down through. And you should have heard the laughter at our table, the snickers coming out of Elijah as he read about Adam and Eve being naked and feeling no shame the other morning. But I want you to consider that little bit of the Bible this morning. It's one verse that says that Adam and Eve were naked and they felt no shame. You know, when God created man, there was no sin. There was a reality there that man had this great relationship with God. He knew him, he walked with him, and literally there was nothing that divided them. That's what it means when it says that they were naked. There was nothing that divided them, nothing that was hidden. And when it says that there was no shame, you know what it says by saying that statement? And it was right, it was good. In fact, you know what happened? The very first thing that happened when they sinned, if you read that particular story, they go and they sew fig leaves together as a wall between them and God. Which, by the way, God sees right through. When I offer God all of me, when I surrender to him, when we talk, we have the most incredible conversations. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 says this: trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. Seek his will in all that you do, and he will show you the path to take. Stop before you start. Don't babble. Talk to him. Be undone. Surrender. But I do have one last story for you this morning. This week I was reading an article about a bunch of different companies that used to be something else. And one particular one I found kind of interesting. There was a guy named Fujui Yakumaye, of something of that sort, lived in Japan, who had a dream that he wanted to make games for kids. And so he invented a card game, produced it, and it became the most popular game in Japan at the time. But eventually it got old, and so the company tried to decide what to do. Between the dates of 1963 and 1968, they set up a taxi cab company, they set up a hotel chain, they set up a TV network, and they set up a food company, all of which failed. So in 1974, they returned to their original purpose, making games for a whole new generation. Today, they're the third most valuable company in Japan. You might know them as Nintendo. But they forgot what they were for a while. They got sidetracked. How about you?